Don't be afraid to give us a few high and low pitches if you don't mind. We've got a great sound set up here at the Punchline Podcast.
Really? Oh gosh, no, I'm terrible. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you will join us, and the world will be as one. I practice that in my shower nowadays. I don't know. That
is actually great, and it sounds so good on the headphones. I'm just going to welcome all the viewers to the Windmill HQ. I'm your head coach. It's a Punchline podcast, and it's all about the mic, body, and soul. So today's esteemed guest is a local talent who is also involved in politics and is actually a councillor for Sandwell Council. And without further ado, I want to invite Ahmed to make a quick introduction about himself.
Hi everyone, my name is Councillor Ahmed Boston. I am a local councillor here in Sandwell. As Sufyan said, I was elected to serve the good people of Abbey back in 2019. I am also a broadcaster by trade, so some of you may have seen my television and radio content I've done over the years. I also serve as a West Midlands representative on the National Counterterrorism Advisory Network, and I'm actively involved in the charity and community sector all around locally and nationally.
Okay, so obviously that's quite a massive portfolio that you just presented to us, and I don't think that was everything. But we're just going to start by talking about your political journey and aspirations and recent achievements. So tell us where it all started. Like, obviously Sandwell is a small place. How is it built? What is the makeup of the town, the structure, and where do you fit into all of it?
So where it all began for me, Sufyan, was a number of years ago. Back when I was a youngster at school, I really wanted to do more than just go to school from 9 till 3. I had burning aspirations to make something of my life. Growing up as a blind person of Pakistani background, Muslim faith here in Sandwell wasn't easy. It was a struggle to find people who were willing to give me the opportunity. My journey into politics actually started from my journey in media. So at the age of about 6 or 7, when I was really young, I would call into radio shows and beg them to get me on the program. That's where my passion for debating and discussing issues came from. That's where I started to get a bit of a political appetite for getting involved with what was being discussed in the media. You'll also remember the terrible atrocities of 9/11 and 7/7. That really moved me significantly as a Muslim youngster growing up here in Britain, growing up here in Sandwell. I saw my community, the Muslim community, being branded with the same brush as people who fundamentally do not stand for anything that I believe in. And I thought this actually really emphasizes why I need to go out there, why I need to have a voice in the media. But Sufyan, people weren't willing to give me that voice. Here I was, a blind youngster, really, really young, wanting to get on radio, wanting to get on television. I wasn't getting that opportunity. I knocked on so many doors, and so many doors were basically shut in my face. Thankfully, at about the age of 12 or 13 years old, I managed to acquire a voluntary placement, which lasted for around 7 years of my life, actually, at Unity FM radio station in Birmingham. I started off with a youth program, and then I went to talk about politics and current affairs. In terms of politics proper, I suppose, I got involved with the Labour Party back in 2010 till about 2012. I was actively campaigning, delivering leaflets, supporting candidates, spending time with local MPs and councillors, understanding more about what the role involved. For about 3 years, I left frontline politics to focus on community work. And when I came back in 2015, upon the election of Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the Labour Party, I was quite passionate about getting back involved. And fast forward 2019, I was elected to serve the people of Abbey. So a bit of a diverse story, really, but it all fits in together, I think, the media and the political experience.
So you said a lot of people would just close doors on you. What was the reaction of people when you approached them for these opportunities? And what did they actually give you a reason why they couldn't give you the opportunity?
I think it was disbelief. I think it was the fact that they didn't believe a person who was blind could operate a microphone or a mixing desk. A person who was blind couldn't operate the computer. How the heck?
So is it discrimination?
Yeah, it is discrimination.
Blatant discrimination.
It is blatant discrimination. It's subconscious discrimination. It's a reality. And Sufyan, for me, it wasn't just a disability. It was my ethnicity. It was my name, Ahmed, a very obvious Muslim name. And in that environment, I think I was a victim of disability discrimination, Islamophobia, and racism all in one. But certainly, people didn't overtly say that to me. They didn't say, do you know what? You're too blind, you're too Asian, and you're too Muslim for our placement. They said, sorry, we haven't got any opportunities, or something very British and very polite like that.
Was there anything constructive in feedback, or was it always just one-liners?
I think it was largely destructive rather than constructive, because they didn't actually give me an opportunity to show my talent. So it was just, here I am, I've applied for this position, I've phoned them up, but they didn't really want to give me that opportunity to get behind the mic for them to see whether I had anything to offer or not.
Yeah, so looking back at the same experience, how did it make you feel? What were your feelings at the time? And let's say you go away from the interview feeling really good that it went well, and you obviously know you're quite an articulate person. You would have a feeling if it went well. How would you deal with the setback of them saying no, the rejection, or that phone call where they say that we don't have an opportunity for you?
I think it was certainly heartbreaking. It certainly felt like a massive ton of bricks had just been toppled on my head. But because I was incredibly young at the time, I think that allowed me to have a certain amount of resilience as well, so that I could get up and I could try again. And my age and how young I was certainly helped me in that, because it just made me all the more determined to carry on knocking on doors and to carry on doing that. Because again, for me, this was a case of trying it out. It wasn't like I was a older person who needed a job and needed to get paid and all the rest of it. I was literally trying to pursue my passion. So yes, it was heartbreaking. Yes, it was a bit of a rejection, but it made me all that more determined to actually try more and try harder and work more persistently at it to prove myself and who I am. And looking back on it, it was sad. It was sad that I had to prove my self-worth, but it paid off in the end.
And were there any physical, environmental sort of obstacles? For example, going to interviews, how would they make it accessible for you? Obviously, being blind, there's certain things that you would need in place in an interview room or on a journey to the interview room. What was actually done for you? Were people cooperative? Were people facilitating? Would people make them reasonable adjustments? And how did you find the whole journey to an interview?
Well, a lot of these in the early days were voluntary positions that I was going for. And I was fortunate enough to have, and am fortunate enough to have a very supportive family around me. So back when I was very young, my mum would go with me to the actual interview, pick me up, stay with me to the interview, drop me off. So that barrier was really resolved in terms of that. Later on in life, as I've gone for interviews for jobs, yeah, I think awareness is greater. I think that if you look at a lot of application forms now, it will say, if you have a disability, please tell us and we'll adapt it. However, the fundamental problem, Sufyan, remains that still doesn't mean you get the position. That still doesn't mean a blind person is taken seriously for a position by all the employers out there. Of course, people will put things on the paperwork. Of course, they'll put stuff on the application form. But does that actually transpire into a real, tangible position? Are you really and seriously being considered for a position? Sometimes, but more often than not, as the unemployment figures for people who are blind show, unfortunately, that discrimination is real and it's a reality.
From a point of view from an employer, what would you suggest or recommend an employer almost like to encourage them to take on more blind employees? What would the one underlining factor or a number of things that you could advise that would make them a little bit more brave, a little bit more agile in their employment to actually take on people with blindness?
Give us a chance. I did a talk for Birmingham City Council a number of years ago regards the disability confidence scheme. So the government introduced an initiative a number of years ago called Disability Confident, where they allowed employers to sign up and basically say to the world, we are willing and we are consciously looking for people with disabilities to employ. And I said at the breakfast that was hosted with a number of major employers, I think it was about 50 to 100 major employers, I said, look, give people with disabilities a chance. The biggest problem we have, like I mentioned to you in terms of my own experience in the early days, is that people aren't willing to open that door. I think if you open that door and if you give someone who suffers from a visual impairment or any other type of disability the chance to prove themselves, I promise you, you will be very shocked by the results. I'll give you a small example. A number of years ago, back when I was at secondary school, I did a week's worth of work experience at the Crown Prosecution Service, and I shadowed a prosecutor who's blind, and I was really inspired by him, even as a blind person myself. I was inspired by how he was listening to his speech synthesizer, JAWS, with one ear, and at the same time, he was speaking to the judge, making such an excellent appeal on behalf of the prosecution. So when you give a blind person a chance to achieve, you will be shocked by the results because, yes, our vision is impaired. My vision is impaired. But what you'll find is my other skills, my listening skills, my speaking skills, my illustration analytical skills are better, perhaps, than a lot of my sighted counterparts.
What impact has it had since it was launched?
I don't think it's had the impact that I would have wanted, to be honest, because people, employers in particular, still don't get it. When a disabled person applies for a job and they have the same amount of skills, the same amount of passion for a position, it is still a reality that employers feel it's going to take a huge amount of expense, a huge amount of effort to adapt that place of employment in order to best address the needs of that person. And actually, when you look at it, I can't remember the figure exactly, but it's around 70 or 80 pounds. According to research that's been done into this, it's about 70 or 80 pounds for any employer to adapt their workplace to make it accessible for a person with a disability. But employers don't understand that. They don't get that. But I think if they're told about that, and if they're told about how little an expense it is, then more people with disabilities in Sandwell, in Smethwick, in this area would be in employment, I believe.
You touched about you had an early interest in politics as a young person. Can you tell us your journey as a child and how you were treated or how you felt being blind?
I was fortunate enough to go to a specialist school, so specialist provision was provided for me. But I was also the victim of a number of, unfortunately, typical forms of discrimination that blind, visually impaired people, disabled people face in our day-to-day lives, where I would go and order something at a shop, for example, and the person who's guiding me, they'll say, oh, what does he want? What does he want? Well, I might be blind, but I'm not stupid. I would think to myself, I might be blind, but I can speak. I can tell you exactly what I want to have. So those were, I suppose, looking back on it now, the more humorous experiences. But actually at the time, they were quite heartbreaking because it just demonstrated to me, and it still happens sometimes today, where people think that because I've got a vision impairment, because I'm blind, I won't be able to answer for myself, or I won't be able to communicate how I feel. Other experiences growing up were around the fact that a lot of people would underestimate me and would underestimate what I could achieve. Thankfully, that didn't happen at school because I went to a specialist school. They understood disability. They understood how it worked. They understood that just because someone's got a disability doesn't mean they're limited. But still, in the wider society and in the wider community, I did find myself underestimated. And I think that was also part of it. So as much as I had a passion for politics, I had a passion for media, I had a passion for talking, as you can tell, I have a passion for talking. I wanted to get involved because I guess it was about proving myself, proving first of all to myself that I could do it, and proving to the rest of the world that a person with a visual impairment, a person with a disability, was capable of going forward and building a life for themselves. In the political arena, more specifically, which is, I think, what you're talking about, Sufyan, it is difficult. You know, Uh, getting involved in a political party is certainly something I would encourage people watching the podcast to do. I think it's really important. Everything from the price of your coffee on the high street to what your country does abroad in your name is affected by politics. But actually, the journey from joining a political party to being able to stand for public office is a very difficult journey. It's not easy. But I was fortunate that around me, like my family at home, I had a supportive network of people who wanted to believe in me, who wanted to give me that chance to go and stand for office. People who are in the ward that I now represent, heavily, hugely supportive of me. People in the Labour Party in Bearwood and Worley Woods, very supportive of me. But again, there was also this conception, and I'll be very honest with you, before I got elected, there were one or two people who turned around and said, "Oh, someone of your background can't stand here. Half the ward will reject you." Now, I don't know if you know Bearwood, Sufyan, but Bearwood is 85, 90% white. And there were some people who turned around to me and said, "Oh, on account of your ethnicity, you can't stand here." And I just turned around to them and said, "Get lost, quite frankly. I am going to stand. And you will see what difference I will make." And again, going back to the experience of my childhood, the racism that I saw, it was very, very isolated. One or two people, very isolated. But that racism that I experienced only made me more passionate, only made me more determined to go there and prove a point. There were some people, and unfortunately, again, this was in our own community, in the Asian community, some people had turned around, not to my face, but to other people, to my friends, and said, "Oh, what is a blind guy doing in Sandwell Council? You know, surely they could have put somebody who can see forward." And I was quite shocked because I thought to myself, we're in 2019, folks. We've got so much equality legislation that's been passed, but the reality is there's still that stigma. There is still that stigma that someone with a disability can't be in public office, can't be doing what an able-bodied person does. And I think it just demonstrated to me, Sufyan, we've got a lot more work to do to prove that point and to show what people with disabilities in Smethwick and Sandwell are capable of.
Definitely. I can only relate to it in a recent experience where I watched a documentary. The person who presents the documentary is a well-renowned religious figure, and he travels the world to find people with talents, unique talents. And there's one particular child that he located in a part of Africa who was deemed as severe disabled. And it was so severe that in that culture, people would name him a witch child because of his disability. But actually prodding through the surface, or what was apparent, this particular scholar actually discovered that this child was a Hafiz of the Quran. And not just a Hafiz of the Quran, almost like a computer. The scholar would just name a number of an ayah and the child would immediately read the correct ayah with the correct tajweed. And it's just sometimes it's our own sort of, I would say, ignorance, where we have a lack of experience, a lack of understanding, and we're not brave enough to expand that understanding and actually go into things with more detail and try and discover what's below the actual surface. And like you said yourself, that you had experiences where people would just shut you out, not give you the opportunity. And even in this day and age, unfortunately, we have people who make them remarks, "What is a blind person doing in the council?" Well, he's doing quite a lot if you have a look. That's the part he's not doing. He's not looking for what you're actually doing. He's quick to make the judgment. He's quick to make the criticism. But has he actually gone past the surface and seen the good work you've done? And like you said, it's all about education. And unfortunately, in our community, I'm from the Asian community. I'm a Pakistani heritage. I come from a large family who are very culturally rich.
Yes.
But unfortunately, some parts of the culture are very negative. And I think it does take a lot of brave conversations to bring that to the surface and talk about that in a public domain and try to tackle that. And I think one of the best approaches we can do, we've got you as a leader. Now you are officially our leader in the council. A councillor, not an MP, is actually leading or representing the people, the constituents of that particular ward. And if we can see a leader doing this job with the disability of blindness, who said no, blind people can't do it? You've basically defied what the general perception is. The general perception was blind people can't do this, blind people, but you're doing it. So you've actually defeated that. And until we make that more public, this podcast will serve as one vehicle to portray that.
I think what saddened me the most, though, Sufyan, was for me on a personal level. I thought, I've broadcast on radio, I've broadcast on television. I have, I think, built for myself a name not only in the local community but in the national community, not for my own sake, but again, as I said before, to show that people with disabilities can do this. But even still, when it came to me putting myself forward for public office, yes, I was victim to racism from very, very limited quarters, which I guess somebody who was Asian or black would also be victim to. That is not acceptable. It's not to be expected, but it's a reality. But what saddened me was the fact that people still thought someone of my acumen, someone of my experience, someone who has no problems in communicating with people, still didn't have a role in the local authority. And that did sadden me. That did upset me. But I do hope that since I've been elected, people have actually seen the reality of what somebody with a visual impairment can do. As I say, I'm talking about a minority. I'm not talking about a majority. I'm talking about a minority. But nevertheless, a minority is still part of the community. So they still have a job to perform. They still have a role to perform. And that role can be one of two things. It can either be one to promote your family members, friends, and community members with disabilities to go forward and achieve their full potential, to stand for public office, to get into good jobs, to acquire good training and good skills, or it can be the polar opposite. And I certainly hope it's the former and not the latter.
You touched on, obviously you faced not just discrimination because of your disability, because of your race. So naturally, it's only fitting for me to come on to the Black Lives Matter issue. And we had recent uproar about discrimination based on race, in particular for black communities and other ethnic minorities. And obviously the visions or the reports and some of the feedback we had were predominantly USA based, but obviously it's transpired that it's in this country as well. So can you elaborate on your position and your view and what the council view or the Sandwell leadership view is on Black Lives Matters, and what sort of constraints or restrictions or mechanisms are in place to try and battle some of the discriminations?
Well, Black Lives Matter, and all lives cannot matter until Black Lives Matter. I've been actively involved with the Black Lives Matter movement here in the UK, especially in recent months, in light of the horrific murder of George Floyd in the United States of America. Sandwell Council's leadership have been absolutely clear that we support Black Lives Matter. We support what the Black Lives Matter movement stands for, and we recognize that what the Black Lives movement is saying is absolutely correct. Because, again, if Black Lives mattered, and again, I'm someone who politically consider myself to be black, because at the end of the day, if you look at a lot of the struggles that the black community are facing, they are not too dissimilar from the struggles the Asian community, a community to which I belong, are facing right now. If you look at the institutionalized and systemic racism that transpires in not only people from the black, Asian, minority ethnic communities struggling to get into employment, even when we do get to particular jobs, particular positions, there are little opportunity for us to be able to progress in those positions. When we get elected into public office, there are constant challenges around being able to stand up. And if you do stand up, then the consequences of actually doing so, standing up against racism, might result in you becoming a victim of racism yourself. These are real challenges. And I think what it certainly encouraged and forced local authorities, not just Sandwell, but all authorities across the country to do, is have a real introspection and ask themselves, when we look at, and actually Councillor Jackie Taylor, who is the cabinet member for transport, she's actually the first ever black cabinet member in the history of Sandwell, which is a massively proud achievement for us obviously this is a Labour Party cabinet that's put this across, but in a more wider context, I'm proud that we've come to that. But I ask myself the question, why? Why has it taken so long for us to have a black person in a position of seniority? We should have been here a number of years ago. Just a week or so ago, Sufyan, I was on Marshall Street, marking 55 years since Malcolm X visited Smethwick. He came to Smethwick to say no to the xenophobia, to the racism, to the hostile environment there was back then. Back then, believe it or not, the Smethwick Council was actively involved in buying up houses to stop black people, Asian people, and people from minority ethnic backgrounds from acquiring housing, from having a decent place to live. And that's why Avtar Singh, 55 years ago, welcomed Malcolm X to Smethwick to encourage the communities, the black, Asian, minority ethnic communities, to stand up against racism. And I am really, really sad that 55 years on, we still have really major problems when it comes to black, Asian, minority ethnic communities progressing, moving forward, and being protected from the venom of racism.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to agree with you. I've had a similar experience where basically around a time in a previous job, there was a big culture about diversity, equality. There was all sorts of mandatory training rolled out across e-learning, electronic learning, so online courses and things like that.
Yeah.
Presentations from higher managers.
Yes.
And a short duration later, within 4 weeks, I had an interaction with the higher manager, and a comment was made, which was not correct, and it stemmed off a conversation about praying, and the workplace had a prayer room, and a lot of the staff were Muslim and used the prayer room to pray.
Yes.
And a lot of the gentlemen, in particular, in the male changing room, used to roll the trousers up above the ankles, because they align with the belief where you should expose the ankle when you pray.
Indeed.
And obviously, naturally, they're walking back from the prayer room back to the desk and they haven't unrolled the ankles. So the managers called one person over publicly on the floor in front of everybody and asked him why his trousers were rolled up. And he explained, when we pray, we expose the ankles.
Yes. Yeah.
And he made a statement, oh, here's me thinking Islam was a religion of sweaty ankles.
Gosh.
So this is the kind of realities. I'm not afraid to say that. And I'm not afraid to challenge it. But the fact that they've invested so much money into equality, diversity training, tackling these inappropriate behaviors, and still you've got a culture or a mindset from a higher manager who should know better, who must know better.
Absolutely.
The challenge is real. So I can only agree with you. And unfortunately, even though we've come a long way, there is still a minority, a very powerful minority, that have an impact negatively on people.
Absolutely.
And on some of the personal traits or beliefs or lifestyles.
Certainly. And in the case of that manager you just mentioned, I have no problem with white middle-class men going forward and getting positions. But why aren't white working-class people going forward and getting those positions? Why aren't black people getting those positions? Why aren't Asian people sitting in those positions? Why aren't people from the Eastern European community sitting in those positions? Why aren't people from those communities that have struggled with deprivation, struggled with racism for so many years, rising to the higher ranks? And for me, the answer is not simple, but it starts with recognizing institutional racism, systemic racism is real. We have to accept that. We have to accept that if there's two people, one person who's white middle class, one person who's Asian or black, even if they have the same skills, the white middle class person is more likely statistically to rise up to that senior office or senior post than his Asian or black counterpart. And that is a dangerous reality, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately. Obviously, I want to touch on your education. You mentioned that you went to a special school where they made special provisions and they understood what your needs and what your requirements were to progress and to achieve and to prosper and to be ready for life. So talk us through your education from a very young age, maybe primary school, secondary school. Did you go to university? Just give us a journey.
Yeah, so I went to Priestley Smith Specialist School, which is in Great Bar, a fantastic school. I went to university for nursery because back in those days, I don't know if you remember, many years ago, the University of Birmingham had a nursery, pretty much a part of its campus. So my nursery schooling was there.
So you went to university very early.
I went to university when, I couldn't even say the word university. So went nursery there, then went to a school called George Auden, which was another specialist school, really, really small. That got closed down because of lack of numbers, unfortunately. Then I went to another specialist school called Priestley Smith Specialist School, and I spent a long time there, pretty much from about the age of 5 till about the age of 16, really, when I'd finished my education. So I did primary school and secondary schooling there. I did my GCSEs after I finished from that school, and that gave me a really good grounding in life, because when I went to that school, they had certain practices that I couldn't really understand at the time. So when we used to sit at the dining table, we had to say to the teacher, "May I leave the table, please?" And they say, "Yes, you may." I did not understand it, but then I thought, you know what? These actual mannerisms that were instilled in me at an early age allowed me to grow up to be quite a polite and decent person. So even those things that were a bit strange to me at the time were almost like, it's not a private school, but like private school-ish, prep school-ish. And I thought, what is this for? And I really understood it later on in life and thought, well, actually, now I say please and thank you quite naturally. I've got them to thank for it. So yeah, I had a really good time at school.
So in the school, do you remember your teachers? Is there any standout teachers that you want to shout out? Or
yeah, teacher-wise, all of them were brilliant, but especially many years ago when I first started at school, I really appreciated the fact that I had support assistants to help me and to support me. So back when I was at George Auden, actually, I was one of the younger students there, so they would actually give me one-to-one lessons. Mrs. Smith, many years ago, was my first support assistant who would help me, who would do activities with me on my own, because all the other kids were big kids and I was much younger and much smaller than them. I can't remember. I was far too young to remember the specific things they taught me, but it was massive in my life. Mrs. Braniff was my infant school teacher. She taught me how to count money, so I've got her to thank all these years on. No one can. Well, not really. I know about the overdraft. No one can rip me off, so I know how to recognize and count money. So she helped me. Every teacher helped me in their own way, really, and I'm grateful to all of them, to be honest. But those were really in my early years, and as you know, those early years in life, those formative years, play quite a key role in how you learn going forward.
Normally, the experiences you have as a young person or a young child normally stay with you for the rest of your life. So it's nice to hear that you had such a supportive teacher, and obviously you remember the name. So the other thing I'm actually intrigued with is your memory is very good. And is that just naturally because you rely on memory a lot, or?
It used to be better many years ago, before I started using a smartphone that's got a speech synthesizer on it and I can feed all my numbers in. I used to remember all the phone numbers of anyone that I wanted to call. I was 6 years old when I got my first mobile phone. So a lot of things, I suppose I've had to remember them. So for example, in my day-to-day work, when I'm broadcasting on radio and television, a lot of presenters will have cue cards, they'll have scripts. I can't use cue cards and scripts as easily because I can't read it. So I have to physically have it in Braille or have a speech synthesizer. Nowadays, I use a lot of speech. So yeah, I've kind of been forced to have a good memory so I can remember things quite well. So I'm able to quote figures and statistics. I guess it's because of the fact that I had no other choice, really. And it's helped me along the way, because when I'm able to sit down and have conversations like this with yourself, Sufyan, I'm able to recall certain things in my life quite a lot of detail.
So
yes.
Tell us about your music journey.
Yeah, so music, I'm a grade 2 trombonist, though it's been a long time since I've actually picked up a trombone. I was actually part of breaking a world record for the most amount of trombones to play any tune at any one time in one place. So a number of years ago, when I was back at secondary school, we were in the city centre. I think it was it Centenary Square in the city centre?
Yeah, Centenary Square.
Centenary Square. And I can't remember the number now, but we certainly broke a world record for the most trombones in one area.
So is that a Guinness Book of Records, is it?
That's a Guinness Book of Records, yeah.
Wow.
So I've got 3 world records under my belt.
Just 3?
Just 3. So that's the first one. I've also got a world record for the longest ever live charitable broadcast in history. The last time we did it twice actually. So we broke it the first time and then we broke it the second time for 11 days, 11 hours and 11 minutes. It wasn't me on my own, I must say. It was a lot of other people involved, but that's my other 2 world records that I have. So that's my music background. I'm also, not that I think I'm particularly good, but many years ago I was part of the choir. So as part of the Birmingham choir a number of years ago, back in my youth. Oh, I suppose I'm still young, but back in my childhood, I suppose.
Don't be afraid to give us a few high and low pitches if you don't mind. We've got a great sound set up here at the Punchline Podcast.
Really? Oh gosh, no, I'm terrible. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you will join us, and the world will be as one. I practice that in my shower nowadays. I don't know.
That is actually great, and it sounds so good on the headphones.
Yeah. Not so good when you listen back to it.
What I mentioned earlier was people are afraid to peel back the layers and go past the surface. And just in this conversation, you've given us, I'll compare you to a dice. You've given us so many faces. You've given us the musician, the person who likes education, the person who's in politics, the person who knows about technology and how it helps disabilities, and also real facts about your day-to-day activities and how people are challenged on race, gender, and other protective characteristics. So what I'm trying to get at here is until people have these conversations, and the purpose of our podcast is to educate people in a fun way, and to bring as many different guests on. And obviously, you've just done that in such an articulate manner, a fun manner, and you've entertained so many people with different interests in just one conversation. And it's really easy to do that. And your disability hasn't stopped you doing that.
No. Well, I'm grateful for the opportunity. And sorry, I didn't answer part of your question. So we went off on a music tangent.
Yeah, but it was about the education.
Education. Yeah. So I did my GCSEs at Pre-Smith School. I then moved to Worcester for 2 years. And I went to a specialist college called New College Worcester. It's a state college nowadays, but it used to be a private school many years ago. So it used to be known as, and I'm trying to remember the exact word now, the School for the Blind Sons of English Gentlemen. So I'm talking now back before the 1920s. It used to be for the blind sons of English gentlemen, which shows you, forget about talking about, problems we have in the Asian community or whatever, but even here in Britain, even here in England, we had a problem many decades ago where if you had a disability, and it still exists to a certain extent, to be honest, if you had a disability, unless your mum and dad were very wealthy, you wouldn't even have access to education. So this college was initially set up for literally the sons of gentlemen, the blind sons of gentlemen, and they'd pay significant sums of monies for their sons, mainly sons, not daughters at the time, unfortunately, mainly sons to go over, only sons at that time to go over and get an education. So I did my A-levels at this college. It's very different nowadays. It's not the same private institution that it was. It's still a brilliant institution, but it's much more inclusive and equal. So I went there. I was actually head boy of the college as well. So I got elected as a head boy, which was a bit of a disappointment for people who had been there for years, because there were some people who had a bit of that private mentality. There was one boy actually stood against me in that election. He said, well, I want to be an alumnus of this college so I may leave here and fly the flag of what this college has done and what it represents. And I just thought, my goodness, wow. Some things don't change. But thankfully, people saw my ability and they elected me. And this is actually the first time, Sufyan, that I stayed away from home. I lived away from home for 2 years.
And how did you feel about that?
Do you know, I did a bit of a cheat because I'd go home on the weekends, but Monday to Friday I was there. It was difficult. I must admit it was actually quite difficult because the first time that I'd been away from mum and dad, been away from the family, and even though I'd acquired a lot of skills by then, it was still difficult. But the most difficult part of it, I guess, for me was the fact that even at the college, I was one of the few Muslim students, one of the few Asian students, and Ramadan, the month of Ramadan where we observe fasting, was the most difficult time because, as you know, what's the best part of fasting? You know, there's many religious benefits, of course, but again, as kids, what do we love? Iftar time, opening our fast. We'd get together with the family and we'd open our fast together. I had to open my fast on my own, so I would regularly look at the very few places there were back then to actually get halal food from. So I'd find myself opening my fast with a doner kebab or whatever. So that was quite difficult, to be honest. That was a big struggle for me. But it certainly allowed me later on in life to go abroad, to go elsewhere on my own and be away from home for whatever period of time, really, and be able to do it quite easily. So I liked it, and I got my A-levels from there. I finished off with A-levels in English, English literature, government and politics, big surprise, I know, and history. So 3 A-levels I finished with. And after that, I went to the University of Birmingham, and I hold a joint BA honours degree in international relations with political science. So that's where my academic education led me to, I suppose.
Okay, so let's change it to your personal life now. So obviously you're a counsellor now. Family? Marriage?
Yeah, so I live at home with my mum and dad, my younger brother, Murtaza, my younger sister, Nur Fatima, and I've also got married recently. So back in...
Congratulations.
Thank you very much indeed. So back in February 2019, I disappeared off the face of the earth for a couple of weeks, and I travelled to my motherland. For my parents are from there. My dad is from there initially, Pakistan, and I got married in Pakistan. So I got to know my now wife through phone conversations, WhatsApp messages. We were introduced by parents, her parents and my parents. And alhamdulillah, I got married in February 2019, went through the overly bureaucratic visa process. So my wife came over to the UK in December. So actually, even though we celebrated our first wedding anniversary in February, we'd only been properly sort of together for 2 months. We've been obviously talking for the past year, but it's like, wow, a year's gone already. So yeah, we got married, and yeah, it's going very well. My wife is very understanding-ish of what I do, and I say ish because she's always annoyed about the fact that I'm always on the phone. It's quite often I'm going out about 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and she's thinking, what meeting is at this time? I said, political meetings, darling. Political meetings do not end. And a good mate of mine, Ali, who has been my mate for the past 20 years, he turns around to me and says, Ahmed, when you want to go to a restaurant or something, you just say to your wife it's a meeting, don't you? I would never do such a thing. Yeah, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, so we're going to go on to your show on Unity FM. So talk us through how it started and where the show is today.
So again, when I went to Unity FM, they were very, very welcoming of me, but they were also a little bit cautious. I said, I want to do a current affairs program and I want to talk about politics. And they thought, 13-year-old about politics, not going to be good for the license. So they started me off on a youth show, but they were actually, again, they gave me the opportunity. Once I got on air, they said, actually, this guy's bloody brilliant. He's not bad. And I listen back to some of my shows and I think this is absolutely terrible. I wouldn't have let the 13-year-old me on air myself, but they gave me that chance. I started off in a youth environment. At that time, I was very involved with the Sandwell Youth Parliament, which started in this very building that we're speaking from now. So I got to interview my youth workers, and various other people would come on my show. Then I sort of upgraded to a current affairs program. It actually became eventually the largest circulated current affairs program on community radio. So we talked about all sorts of issues nationally and internationally. I've in my radio and television career, I suppose I've interviewed the former Prime Minister, Theresa May. I've interviewed people from the UN, a lot of prominent people over the years. I've been very, very fortunate that media has allowed me to do that. I've met a lot of people through media, and I have learned a lot as well on the way. So after starting my current affairs show, which was 2 years after I started at Unity FM, so in about 2009, I did that for about 5 years. So 5 years I did that. I also served on the board of Unity FM, so I was part of the management board as well, significantly involved in not only my own program, but also helping them form the editorial policy for the station as a whole. In 2014, I left radio to focus more on television. So I had a show on Noor TV for a number of years. And in 2014, I was invited by British Muslim TV, a channel that had just set up that year, to be their political editor. So I served and continue to serve as their political editor today. And I've recently, as a result of the lockdown, I've come back to Unity FM as a presenter. So it's gone a bit full circle, to be honest. Yeah.
Brilliant. So in media, if there was a young person, or there will be young people watching this particular podcast who have an interest in, let's say, politics and journalism and media, what would be your one golden advice for them to get started?
Go into community radio. Community radio is the lifeblood of genuine journalism. And I say that wholeheartedly because in community radio and community media, you are free to talk about what you want. I'm sorry, but when you go to a lot of these other big media organizations, they're more motivated by the commercialism side of things. So you'll find that many stations nowadays are music-based. But what that's done is it's killed the type of thing that we're having right now, a speech podcast, people speaking. And actually, a lot of people say to me, Ahmed, you speak really well. And I turn around to them and I say, the reason why is because I've been brought up on radio. I listen to radio. I listen to how other people speak. And as a youngster, I imitated people who I heard speaking well. And over the years, I've developed my own style. So real advice to all youngsters out there is please go into media. Please be a part of that. Because even for young people, you will find other people will shape your narrative. They will speak about you. They will portray you. And that will have an impact on you moving forward in terms of the jobs you get, how you're treated in the street, unless you go forth and you shape your own narrative. So go into community media, do podcasts like the chaps over here, and just try it out and have that flexibility. There's many stations out there. Not just Unity FM where I'm at. You've got New Style Radio, Big City Radio, Aston FM, Raj FM up in West Bromwich doing some good work. There's so many stations out there. Contact any one of them in terms of the genre that you want to get into and start. And certainly any support that I can give to any budding journalists out there, I'm more than happy to do that.
Okay. You also have a charity, don't you?
Mm.
So can you talk about the charity?
Yes, so I've been involved in a number of charities over the years, to be honest. So locally, if we start with locally, I'm involved with Sandwell Visually Impaired, which is a charity that I didn't set up. It's been going for many, many years now, over 10, 11 years, I think at least, probably 13, 14, to be honest. And it serves over 1,450 blind and visually impaired people in the borough of Sandwell. They organise a range of activities, social interaction for people with a visual impairment in Sandwell to get involved with. And it's a lovely organisation. It's run by visually impaired people for visually impaired people. It's grown a huge amount over the years, and it's a real pleasure to be a trustee of that organisation. I am also a founding member of Penny Appeal. Many of your listeners may have heard of Penny Appeal. It started up in 2009. I've been actively involved on the fundraising side of things for many, many years. They operate around the world in over 30 crisis-hit countries. Back in 2015, I was involved in setting up Medical Relief International, an organization still running to this day. I'm not actively involved in it anymore, but we've done a huge amount of work through Medical Relief International. We were one of the first organizations on the ground in Lesvos to help the refugees. We also rebuilt the maternity and neonatal unit at the Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza in light of the bombardment over there in 2014, and a whole range of other initiatives. So, yeah, my passion for charity is big. I'm really involved in charities, and it's been a pleasure to be a part of so many of them over the years.
That is fantastic. It's nice to see that there's not just one charity, it's a broad range. And obviously, you've helped set up some charities, but you're also actively helping existing charities. I want to go back to the part where you talked about speaking well. So, obviously, you figured I've got a very strong yam accent.
No, you speak very well.
And when I first heard your voice on radio, I didn't think you was from Sandwell. I thought you was somebody who's either Oxford, a university, someone
Right, yes.
from a very high organisation. And I heard you sing as well. So you obviously can change it up when you need to. As a boxing coach, I always speak with a yam accent, and I think that's part of who I am. And if I did a radio show, you probably wouldn't understand half the things I'm saying, because I'd say things like, "Are you all right?" Like,
That's fantastic. Yeah.
But obviously, elocution, especially in the Asian community, is what I'm trying to get towards. It's important
Absolutely.
to speak correct and speak clearly, because it's a method of communication. And if you want people to understand you, you need to speak in a tone which is clear and where people can understand. So going back to the media and the radio, what advice would you give to young people who are trying to get on radio in terms of speech therapy or getting their communication correct?
I would say listen to BBC Radio 4. That was where I started, to be honest. Listening to Radio 4, listening to their programs, listening to speeches, because unfortunately, we still have a huge class divide. We in Sandwell are the victim of years and years of deprivation. Years and years of deprivation. And if you look at the facilities and services that are provided in private schools, they're nowhere to be seen in the state system. So if you went to a private school and your parents were rich enough, my parents weren't, and many other parents are not, rich enough to pay £40,000-50,000 a year or £20,000-30,000 a year at the minimum to send their child to that school, part of the education standards were to give you elocution lessons and are to give you elocution lessons. But we as working class people need to teach ourselves. So I would say listen to Radio 4, listen to programs on there. And actually, by getting involved in broadcasting, by getting involved in journalism, that will improve the way you speak anyway. Now, it's not the case that if you speak with an accent, you don't speak well. Sufyan, you speak very well. Yes, you speak with an accent, but you speak very well. When I go out of Birmingham, people can tell that I'm from Birmingham because they can hear a slight twang in my tone, which says I'm from Birmingham, Black Country, that type of area. That's not a bad thing. But if you want to be able to speak well and you want to be able to improve that so you're able to go for broadcasting positions in the future, don't get rid of your accent. Don't get rid of your identity. That is fundamental to who you are. But if you do want to speak well, my top advice is listen to Radio 4, listen to podcasts, listen to documentaries, listen to books that you'll get on things like Audible, for example, audiobooks, because many of the narrators there are very, very well spoken, and develop your own style. That's the most important thing. Develop your own unique style.
You said something earlier about one of your teachers. Was it Miss or Mrs. Smith?
Mrs. Smith, I think it was.
Okay. And going back to that particular note, are there any other heroes in your journey to where you are today? And would you like to shout anybody out?
Yeah, so a number of heroes. First and foremost, my late grandfather, Allama Bosan Qadri Rahmatullah Alayhi, was a huge influence in my life. He was a political leader in Azad Kashmir, where we are from. He served as Minister for Religious Affairs over there, a very well-known figure in the Muslim community here in Britain as well, very good in the interfaith community. And he really inspired me to move forward. For a man of his generation, he thought many, many years ahead. He never saw my disability as a barrier. In fact, I recall having conversations with my mum, and she said, when I was born, my parents always tried to make sure that I didn't feel disadvantaged because of my disability. And it was my grandfather that really gave them the confidence to do that, because he said, look, yeah, he may have a disability, but you know what? He can go and achieve something. So first and foremost, my grandfather. He was instrumental in really making those dreams a reality. My parents, obviously, my siblings, but in the wider community, people have helped me along the way. My teachers, I suppose if you look at every industry, it has its own various heroes. So in terms of media, Nasser Mahmood, who was and is a station manager of Unity FM. I remember going to him all those years ago. He gave me the opportunity to broadcast my first radio show. Adeem Yunus, the founder of Penny Appeal, and he was instrumental in getting me involved and passionate, and really getting me involved in the charity sector. On the political side of things, former deputy leader of Sandwell Council, Mahbub Hussain, has been instrumental in motivating and inspiring me to get active locally in Sandwell. So, yeah, a lot of people, to be honest, but certainly these few I've mentioned have been absolutely incremental in my journey.
Right, in typical fashion for this podcast, we always wrap up with the guest giving us the last one-liner or 2 lines, or in some cases 10 lines. Whatever you want to say as a final advice to young people or anybody watching this podcast, relating to your journey and your success and your ongoing story, a bit of advice, a bit of encouragement, a bit of motivation.
I would say dream it, believe it, achieve it is my summary. That if you believe, if you dream of being someone, you will become that person. Never let anyone say to you that you're unable to achieve that aspiration. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. You've heard from me over the past hour or so about my own challenges, but with the right support, with the role models in our local community, and with the support of great initiatives like yours, Sufyan, our young people in Sandwell can really achieve whatever they want. It's harder for us. The challenges we face are unprecedented, but you know what? They're not impossible. Even the word impossible says I'm possible.